Hi, thanks for joining us in our continuing series on Rus. Rather than asking you to rate and share this podcast, I would request that if you find this content interesting, please tell a friend and help us grow our audience. This week we get answers in earnest. Our largest conceptual questions revolve around understanding how Rus came to be accepted as a convert, why Boaz and the people of Beit Lechem were not kinder to Rus and Naomi when they returned, how Boaz was able to pair field redemption with the marriage of Rus, and what the symbolism embedded in our story can teach us. We address all of these issues and much more this week. Hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening.
That's definitely the answer. All right, so I think we've been.
Would you like some of this? Your father was admiring.
I think we've been exploring Megillat Rus for close to 5 months now. So I want to thank everybody for the long haul and putting off the answers to the questions until now. But my hope is this week to present the pièce de résistance.
Check out that French.
Right. Okay, so without any further ado, let's recap our questions before we get to any answers.
We're not starting with a quote?
We are not starting with a quote this week, I know. We had 2 last week, so I kind of overdid it. Now I have to back it. Next week there'll be a quote. Okay.
If you want to turn the video on so I can see everybody?
Oh, you're not going to see everybody because my laptop is, I'm using it for my notes, so you're going to see the ceiling.
Okay, all right. I got it.
We'll do a once around.
Okay. Yeah, I get it. Hi, guys.
Chaim.
Chaim, enjoy. Okay, sorry, I get it.
Shimmy, those cupcakes are amazing. Oh my gosh, I've never had one that's been that good. Your wife is super impressive.
Okay, there is no shimmy or cupcakes. I'm sorry. We couldn't resist. Okay, so the questions that we've left unanswered. Question number 1, why didn't Boaz, and this is my hobby horse, why didn't Boaz or the people of Beit Lechem treat Rus and Naomi better when they showed up, right? Boaz had the ability to make Rus and Naomi not impoverished, not continue to need to come back for food day in and day out. Why didn't they do so? The second question, I think this is Charles's favorite. If we take the idea of corporeal election, this idea that we brought up when we were doing the Bereshit series, the fact that God has chosen the Jewish people, chosen for the sake of being chosen for no other reason. If we take that idea seriously, then how does that stem? How does that work with the concept of conversion? If I choose these people, then I chose those particular people, and I would love to hear, and I didn't choose these other people. So now all of a sudden you're telling me, but those other people can become the people that I chose. How does that work? Number 3, I think we had was, how does Boaz marry a Moabite, right? We went through the drasha of Moavi v'lo Moavit, and we asked a lot of questions on that. And
his brother-in-law worked out that one before.
Yeah, something like that. Are there any other avenues that we can explore that will allow Boaz to marry a Moabite without casting a pall over the whole situation? The next question we had is, how does Boaz combine the field redemption with the marriage, right? Plony shows up and Boaz says, you have to redeem the field. Plony's like, no problem. And Boaz says, well, but if you do that, you also have to marry Rus. And he's like, oh, that is a bridge too far. Well, who says? How did you put those 2 things together? Why can't he just redeem the field and not marry the Rus? Like, why? Where did that whole thing come from? And then finally, we talked about all the symbolism that comes along with the Megillah, the stories that it references. What is all of that there to teach us? Okay, so Kadarkenu B'Kodesh, we're going to start off with. Sorry, you wanted to give an option for the conversion.
Yeah, the reason why, we were chosen, how come conversion can be allowed? I heard a Vart from, I forgot which Rebbe of mine, that when the Torah was given to us, in the song, he asked all the other nations. So some of the people in those nations were like, yeah, we want the Torah, but the overwhelming majority was like, no. So their descendants were able to convert, and that's how they also got a piece of being chosen. So that's what I was going to say for the reason that conversion is allowed.
I like that. That's very cool. I have not heard that one before. Thank you. Okay, so I want to start off with how Boaz is able to marry Rus, and we'll start with the theory, which will sound a little off the wall, and then hopefully we can bring in enough support to make it sound a little less off the wall. Essentially, the theory is that Rus does not convert in the course of the Megillah at all, at least in a standard conversion the way you would expect it to happen in Beis Din today. Rather,
She pre-converted. She converted before the story starts.
Okay, maybe, but she's called Moaviyah basically through the entire story until the end.
Correct, but she converts at the very beginning.
So if she converts at the beginning, you have two problems. Why is she called a Moabite, and why doesn't Ploni want to marry her?
That's that because it's a question of whether the conversion was good, but the conversion happened.
Okay.
The conversion happened earlier.
That's certainly one approach.
From the get-go, because if there was never a conversion from the get-go, then there was never an issue. Then there's no possibility that they would be able to redeem the property through her.
That's only one approach. That's
Yeah,
why Rus
it's certainly one approach.
Rus to go back, in order for her to go back, because they hadn't really converted.
Right.
That's right.
That's the other.
Right, but
These are all both important objects.
correct. But if you were to say that the ability to be the goal for the property comes through Rus, then Rus had to have pre-converted beforehand.
Right, that's one approach. So there's problems with both.
Right.
That's why there's an argument.
And I'm sure there'll be problems with the one that I'm about to propose, but let's hear it out, and then we can attack it. Essentially, what I'd like to propose is that Rus used a legal loophole in order to convert, but the conversion didn't complete itself until the very end, and I'll explain what I mean. Essentially, the way you posit this is that Rus was a shivcha. Rus was a non-Jewish female slave, and in so becoming, she actually calls herself. She says, "I'm not even like one of your shivchaseich, or I'm your amaseich." So she refers to herself this way in the text. This halachic loophole exists where, so let's back up. A non-Jewish woman who becomes a slave to a Jewish family goes through some minimal amount of a conversion, not a complete conversion. She is now mechuyev in mitzvos like a woman. So she's not completely a Jew, but she's also not completely not Jewish anymore. There's questions about her touching wine and all kinds of fun. Once that non-Jewish female slave is emancipated, her conversion completes, and she is now a full-fledged Jew and can marry full-fledged Jews. This is a halachic loophole, we'll call it for lack of a better term, of how you can take someone who's not supposed to be right. The pasuk is lo yavo amoni moavi b'kahal Hashem. They're not supposed to join the kahal Hashem, but if you bring them in through this kind of backdoor process, they can in fact become a Jew.
Does that work for a male?
So I believe it works for a male or a female, and I'll prove to you that this halachic loophole works because we've actually applied it in practice to an even stricter case. So in that same list of people who are not supposed to join the congregation of the Jewish people, the first one is mamzer. Lo yovo mamzer b'kahal Hashem, right? But Rebbe Tarfon says in the Gemara and Kedushin that normally the status of the mamzer is eternal, right? A mamzer has another child, that child is a mamzer, and the status of mamzer continues l'dorei doros. But there is a backdoor to get a mamzer in for the mamzer's lineage to be metaher, and that is for the mamzer to quote unquote marry to have a shivcha, who then he can have a child with the shivcha. That child is his biological child, but not his halachic child. When the child is free, the child becomes a full-fledged Jew and is no longer under the stigma of mamzer.
He can only have a child with a shivcha if he's a slave, no?
If she's a slave.
But she can be his slave?
She can be his slave.
Person's allowed to marry his own shivcha.
Not allowed to marry. Not allowed to marry.
He's allowed to cohabit with his shivcha.
Cohabit is not a problem.
So not only is it not a problem, this was actually applied lahalacha. So there is in the responsa literature, in the Shaila V'tshuva literature, there are examples of this type of marriage, quote unquote, taking place with the most well-respected rabbis of the town attending the ceremony. There was even a question, so that stopped in, let's say, the 1700s, 1800s. It stopped completely when slavery was abolished. The reason for that, and the reason, there's one more chair over there in the corner. The reason that it is no longer a viable option is because slavery is against the law of the land. So if you have a situation where dina de malchusa dina, the halacha is you cannot have a slave. So even if both parties are willing, even if the woman said, the Giora says, you know what, I'm going to first become a shivcha and I'll go through this whole process with you, even if she's willing and he's willing, you can't make a kinyan that is connected, that opposes the law of the land.
So are you saying that
This
she was
is
Kilion's?
So okay, so it's going to get murky, and I apologize that I'm not as well. I won't say I'm not as well prepared. I'm not 100% sure where I want to plant the flag of when did she become a shivcha. I like the idea that she is a shivcha at the very beginning, because then you can read.
What is the very
Kilion's shivcha.
So either Kilion Shivcha or Naomi Shivcha after Kilion dies, Machlon dies. Right.
It would have to be. It would have to be when he was alive,
Why?
because again, you're dealing with the redeeming of the fields through Ruth.
Right. So we'll get to that in one minute.
But I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think my shifcha doesn't have the right to redeem my fields.
Right. So we're going to get to the field redemption in a minute.
That's a property issue.
I agree with you. We're going to get to the field redemption in a minute. So hold it. But I want to come back to it. If she is Machlon or Naomi's shivcha, then the conversation they have where Naomi says, go back, and they say, no, we want to stay with you, that's this week's parsha, right? That's the Eved who says to the master, I want to free you, right? Naomi says, go back to whatever, you're emancipated. No, we want to stay with you is like literally this week's parsha. Yeah, yes.
If it makes a lot of sense to say that she was a shifcha in order to, the whole concept of Boaz saying to Ploni Almoni was letting you know she's coming along with the field. Well, why?
Right.
Well, if she's a shifcha,
so that gets to the answer. You're like 5 steps ahead. We're gonna get to that.
And also, when you say, "Oh, it's like what's happening in this week's parsha," that's a bad thing. And
it's a bad thing if it's a Jew. It's a bad thing if it's a Jew, right? The Jew's not supposed to. The Jew's supposed to say, "I'm an Eved to Hashem. I'm not an Eved to this other Jew."
A non-Jew who's becoming a Jew should have that in mind. And
maybe,
like,
yeah. I don't know.
During their conversion process, shouldn't be like, "I want to be a slave."
Right. I hear you. So I have not seen anybody else say this. So in the beginning, I felt like I was on very shaky ground. I did run it by.
you ran it by a book.
No, Tamar Ashkenazi, the one who
She responded to you.
Yeah, she responded, and she liked it a lot. So that made me feel a little bit better. But then I felt a lot better when I found the Medrash. And I want to digress for like 30 seconds just to talk about Medrash in general. Charles, are you with me? Oh, he's on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm listening. I'm trying to follow. It's a little bit esoteric, but so far I'm with you.
Okay. So 30 seconds on Medrash in general. The Tanakh has been canonized, right? It's very clear what is in and what is not in Tanakh. The Torah Shebaal Peh, the Torah Shebaal Peh partly went through the same process. So we know what is in and what is not in the Mishnah. We even have what's called a brisa, that's outside, right? We know what is in Shas, right? Ravina, Ravashi, or Sofara. We have a pretty good sense of what is in that part of Torah Shebaal Peh. In the Medrash part of Torah Shebaal Peh, that is not quite the case. We know in Medrash Halacha, right, the Sifra, the Sifri, the Mechilta, we know certain things that are make up that body of Medrash, but then there's a whole body of Medrash that is sort of the Wild West. So you have in front of you a sampling. We have, people familiar with Medrash Rabbah, Medrash Tanchuma, Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer. These are things that look like collections, but are not. Medrash Rabbah was not all written in one chunk, from beginning to end. Some of it is hundreds of years older than other parts of it. Then there are collections of medrash. So there is Otzer Midrashim, Bate Midrashis, which you'll see in there, are collections of stray Midrashim that are found here and there. There are Midrashim that we would probably consider outside of the canon. And then in the Middle Ages, there started to be a series of collecting.
By definition, they're all outside the canon.
What do you mean?
They were never canonized.
So that's fair. I wouldn't say they're outside. If they're not canonized, they can't be in or out.
They're
right?
not canonized. They were all outside the canon.
Well, if there's no canon, then can you say they're outside the canon?
But there is a canon.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's hard. It's more amorphous. It's more amorphous than the canon of Tanakh or the canon of Shas. If you saw,
it is the canon of Tanakh and the canon of the Mishnah, okay, and the canon of the Gemara were canonized. Everything else was not canonized.
Right. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so by definition, these are outside the canon.
The outside of that canon, yes.
They're outside of the canon.
Right.
But there are more like mainstream midrashic sources, and then there are more out there.
Right, but that doesn't mean that they carry weight or that they were meant for the generations.
Right. It's very hard to know for some of these collections, like the Yalkut Shimoni, right? The Yalkut Shimoni was a collection that was published in, 1300s, 1400s. Mm-hmm. Some of those midrashim we know from other sources. Some of them we don't have the other source. He will quote a medrash. We don't know if that is an accepted, a mainstream source or not. In general, people tend to treat Yalkut Shimoni as mainstream, so whatever he quotes has now become mainstream. There is another collection of midrashim, another Yalkut, that is contemporaneous with Yalkut Shimoni, not as well known, but to the best of my knowledge is still mainstream medrash. That's called the Yalkut Makiri. The Yalkut Makiri, which I don't have here, they have it on Hebrew books, is again a medieval collection of midrashim, a good percentage of which we have sources for in quote-unquote mainstream midrashim. Several we don't have sources for. He quotes it from a quote-unquote medrash. We don't have that medrash extant anywhere else, so we don't know where that medrash comes from. The Yalkut Makiri is on everything except the Chumash and the Chamesh Megillot. What I'm going to quote to you now is from the Yalkut Makiri. We're not going to read it inside just for the sake of time, but I will give you the gist of it, which is the shtick that I'm telling you of let's get the Moaviyah into the Jewish people by way of Shivcha, is essentially what the Yalkut Makiri says Yishai, David's father, tried to do himself. So the story that the Yalkut Makiri brings down is as follows. Yishai is worried about his yichus because he comes from this union of Rus and Boaz, and he's sort of not super comfortable with the Moavi velo Moavit drasha, and as everyone else wasn't comfortable with it, so he hatched a plan. He decides he has his own Shivcha Kananis, and he tells her, look, we're going to be together, and then the child that comes from that, I'm going to free that child, and that way we'll make sure at least that child is not under this whole stigma. To cut to essentially a Rachel and Leah situation where the Shivcha freaks out. She goes to Nitzevet, who, if you guys remember from the Gemara and Baba Basra, we've got the list of all the names of people whose names we don't know, right? We have Shimshon's mother and Avram's mother, and we have David's mother. David's mother's name was Nitzevet. So the Shivcha Kananis goes to Nitzevet, David's mother, and says, here's what my master is telling me that I'm supposed to do. And Nitzevet says, don't worry about it. You go snuff out the candle, go lock the door, and when you go to lock the door, we'll switch places, and then I'll be there instead of you. And that is exactly what happens, and David ends up being born from Nitzevet, from his father and mother, and not from this Shivcha Kananis. But the plan was to do exactly what I'm describing, to be with the Shivcha Kananis, to have a child, to free the child, and that way you removed all the stigma of maybe this child comes from a Moabite.
Why after all the siblings?
So that's a good question. The pasuk that the Medrash is commenting on is Evan Masu Habanim Haisel Rosh Pina, that because the family essentially thought that David actually came from the shivcha and not from the mother, so they treated him like Cinderella, like he was the unwanted stepchild in the beginning.
You could say that of the father. It's sort of difficult to say that of the mother.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they were both pregnant at the same time. I don't know. I can't tell you. I can't comment more than what's in the Medrash. That is, if you want to see it inside, it's the Yalkut Makiri 118:28, and I would be happy to share the sources with that afterwards. You had something. I'm
Right.
sorry.
I'm just throwing this out there. If Yishai's yichus is a problem, right? Then, and the question is whether or not he's Jewish, right?
Right.
So then what does him owning a slave and having a child with a slave make any difference?
Right.
It's not Jewish.
Right. I agree with you. If you look at this Medrash under the halachic microscope, I don't think it stands up.
Right.
But I think the concept that it's...
The thought is he never sinned.
Right. But I think it at least illustrates this idea that the loophole concept is there. I just want to mention the fact that the mamzer being purified works lahalacha. There's a very comprehensive article by Rabbi Dr. David Katz, who is a tremendous historian. He has a podcast that I highly recommend everybody listen to. He has an extensive article called The Mamzer and the Shivcha, where he goes through the halachic status, the history, the legalities of it, and basically concludes, like I mentioned, that it would be possible in theory, but today we can't do it because we're not allowed to buy slaves. Okay.
What a funny world.
Yeah, seriously. Thanks a lot, Lincoln.
Okay, so now let's get to your point in terms of the field redemption. So if Rus is still a slave when it comes to the field redemption, then what Boaz is doing is acquiring the field and acquiring her. He's not redeeming the field through a kinyan chalipin.
How is it chalipin?
That's why Plonies takes off his shoe, right? We were talking about why is Ploni taking off his shoe? What does it have to? How is anybody acquiring anything? So the halacha is that you can acquire. I'll read to you from Choshen Mishpat. Choshen Mishpat 202 halacha ches. Says as follows: Hamakna avodim v'karkos ke'echad hichzik ba'avodim lo kana es hakarkos. Person who wants to acquire both the eved and the land at the same time. So if he is machzik ba'avodim, he grabs the slave. Lo kana es hakarkos. You can't acquire property through metalton, through movable things. Hichzik b'karkos. If he acquires the land. Im hayu avodim bisocha, if the slave is there in the land, kana, then he acquires the slave. Im lav lo kana, and if not, he hasn't acquired the slave. Hafilu shiyomer lo kana osam al gabi karka. Even if he says, I want to acquire the two of them together, he can't unless the slave is in the karka that he is acquiring, which he can do through a kinyan chalipin.
But your problem is with the chalipin is that they have no connection then to the property.
What does that mean? If the slave, that's what we just said. If the slave is physically on the property,
then he didn't own the property.
How is he? Okay. The way he's kona the property with Rus is Rus was married to the family. He's kona. He marries Rus and thereby is able to get the field through Rus.
No, I don't think that's correct. I think
I always heard it.
I think Naomi owns the field, and what Boaz says is Naomi is selling or has has sold the field, and now the field needs to be redeemed. So Ploni first says I will redeem it, and then backs out. Either he redeemed it and Boaz then has to buy it from Ploni, or Ploni didn't redeem it and Boaz is now buying the field. Either way, the mechanism of buying the field is kinyan chalipin.
I thought the chalipin was through Rus. Okay.
I don't believe so.
I thought the chalipin was through Rus. It's not through
I've seen that explanation as to why.
That's how I always was looking.
I can't disagree that approach exists, but I don't see it from the text. The way the text reads to me is Naomi is selling the field, and somehow Rus comes along for the ride. My answer to how is Rus coming along for the ride is that she is an eved, and more than that, one of the questions we raised, if you remember, at the end of the third perek, Naomi tells Rus, stay here, Boaz is going to take care of everything. And the question we asked at the time is, why stay here? go to court. The point is, you have to be here. You have to be on this land, because if he's going to marry you, if he's going to acquire you, and the other thing I will point out,
You see, I wrote that differently. I said that she had to stay there because she's the one who, within which he's able to redeem.
But why would she have to stay there? If she's selling the field, she should be at court selling the field.
Selling the field. She doesn't have the field, and nor does Naomi have the field. They both.
They sold it already.
The property has long since been sold.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The only way that the only, so to speak, connection that they have to it is they have, so to speak, ancestral rights,
right?
Which are halachic.
For sure.
That's the idea of the goal.
Which is the idea of the goal, correct? Which is the idea of the goal. And my understanding has always been is that the goal, the reason that she's the one part of it is that he's getting her, and through her, getting the right to be the goel for the properties.
He's marrying her
and getting the right through her
to that property,
to the properties themselves. And Naomi is saying, stay here because you have to be the conduit within which he can then have the right for the ancestral properties.
So I'm not sure why then the pasuk would say that Naomi is selling the field, and I'm also not sure how halachically she would have any right to the field, even if she.
Naomi?
No, Rus.
Rus has the right to the field because it's ancestral, and her husband was the descendant.
But it was not. It doesn't pass to the wife. Meaning, if it's Elimelech's field.
It's Elimelech's field.
Right.
Okay. She was Elimelech's wife, and Elimelech is dead.
She was Machlon's wife.
Machlon. Okay. Elimelech's son is Machlon.
Right.
Elimelech is dead. Machlon is dead.
It doesn't pass to pass to Machlon's wife.
It passes to Machlon's wife through the ancestral.
But then why didn't it go to Naomi?
Right.
I mean, if it goes to the wife,
it did go to Naomi. But Naomi isn't marrying.
Right.
She's not marrying.
Okay, if it goes to the wife,
okay,
then Naomi has it.
Not
if
really.
it goes,
right.
If it goes to the surviving son,
If it goes to the wife, Elimelech died first, and then it's in Machlon's area.
Right.
Again, so it doesn't.
But no. If he had married Naomi, that would have been fine. He didn't marry Naomi though. He marries Rus. And why does he marry Rus? Because Rus was Machlon's husband, and Machlon had the ancestral right to the properties.
Okay, I hear you. I hear you.
And that's why Rus, is so important to the story because for the ancestral
because it's her field.
Because it's her ancestral right
So then it
through her
doesn't go
husband.
to his
Got
wife.
it.
That's how
Okay.
I always learned.
I hear.
That was sons are dead.
Yeah, so once the son's dead, does it go to the mother?
Machlon, Naomi could have done it also had she married someone, but she wasn't in the market for marrying.
What I'm trying to say is that if it goes to the wife, right? Meaning if it can go to the wife, then it would go to Naomi. Before. Yeah.
Okay, let's just bring it back because I want to finish this idea and hopefully get to one or maybe even two more.
If it goes to the
He goes to the wife because there's no children.
We're saying it goes from the father to the child. It doesn't go to his wife.
Yes, but if
correct?
there's no
I
child,
don't
then
think
there's
it
no
goes
wife.
Okay.
to the wife. I agree with the...
If we continue with this line of reasoning that she's a shivcha, there's actually an interesting halachic implication to her asking Boaz to spread his cloak over her. So she comes to the threshing floor and she says, "Paras kanafecha," right? Spread out your cloak. The Gemara in Bechoros says as follows: Bevigdova, which is a pasuk in our this week's parsha, Kivan shepirish taleso aleha. If the master spreads his talis over his slave, his female slave, shuv eino rasha lemochra. He's not able to then sell her anymore. He has to marry her. That act of spreading, specifically the act of spreading the cloak, is an act of betrothal, and that's all it takes. It doesn't take any other kesef kedushin. That is enough. That divrei Rabbi Akiva. Those are the words of Rabbi Akiva. So I found that to be that's a symbolic enough act to show this is the person I'm designating for marriage, and therefore he can't continue to treat her as a slave. He has to now treat her as someone he's planning to marry. one more thing that I think is relevant. Well, we'll two, and then we'll hopefully cover one other topic at least a little bit. If we persist with this reading, then I think the naming of Rus's son makes much more sense. We had talked about where does this name Oved come from? It doesn't reference anything. It has nothing to do with the rest of the Megillah. And where like what does it mean? Why is it significant? But if Rus is an Eved, then naming Oved, the name that you named him, is incredibly significant. All the other names seem to mean something. Maklon and Kelin, and we darshan the names, and Naomi says, no, I'm Mara, and all the names have meaning. And suddenly we get this out of left field, oh, and the kid's name is Oved. Where did that come from? I know exactly where it came from now, because it's identifying the fact that she was an Eved, and that bringing this Eved in, right? We talked about incorporating the other, and how difficult it is to incorporate Gerim like a Sapachas, like Saras. That's not an easy thing, and now we're celebrating it. We're saying, look at what was able to be accomplished. We brought in Rus, and now we're Makadesh, the concept of Eved. We've elevated it and shown how it leads to something significant. Last thing I'll do is mention the psukim that we quoted in Devarim that talk about the fact that you have to leave over parts of the field for the poor. So the pasuk says as follows: Ki tachbot zeisecha lo tafar acharecha lager liyasamu lamana yihya ki titzor karmecha lo ta'olel acharecha lager liyasamu lamana. Right, we have to leave all these things over for the ger, the yasam, and the almana. Why do you have to do all these things? Says God. V'zacharta ki ever hayisa be'eretz Mitzrayim al kain anochi mitzavcha lasos es hadavar hazeh. Remember, you were avadim. Not remember you were Gerim in Mitzrayim, which is usually the Lashon I have. No, remember the concept of Eved, says God. You experience that concept of Eved. That's why you have to leave the field over for the poor who are going to go and collect from it. That's exactly what Rus experienced. She experienced the benefit of the fact that the Jews were Avadim. That's why there was in the field for her to pick, and that's what led to the consequence of the whole story. Okay. Ad Khan, I think we answered hopefully a few of our questions. I'll push my luck just a little bit more. I hope you guys will bear with me. This one's a little long, but maybe we can at least start it. Okay. So throughout our learning of the Megillah, we talked about the story baggage that came along with the Megillah, right? What are some of the stories in the Chumash that came along with our Megillah?
Yehud and Tamar.
Yehud and Tamar and Lot and his daughters, right? So I think we can read the entire Megillah symbolically, story by story. We will see why those stories are important and what the lesson that we should learn. One of our questions was what is all the symbolism about? Okay, so we have to posit at the beginning that the goal of the Megillah is to combine we mentioned this at the very beginning. There's a breakdown in Bereshis of the fruit of the womb and the fruit of the land, right? And we sort of made a Gzera Shava in a very superficial way that the two times in the Megillah that it talks about God making a blessing was for the fruit of the womb and the fruit of the land, right? There was no harvest in Beit Lechem, and then God blessed them that there should be food again, and then Rus was barren, and God blessed her that she was able to bear children. So we put that together as kind of a Gzera Shava. See, the Megillah is addressing what happened in Bereshis, but I think we have to sort of dig into that a little bit more concretely. And what ties both of those two things together, the fruit of the womb and the fruit of the land, is Zerah, right? Zerah is what both of those things come down to, is seed. And Zerah is that concept, if you look at it more abstractly, is the idea of continuity. It's to produce an heir. It's to produce something that follows suit. Naomi is not able to produce that continuity until she gets to Eretz Yisrael. And what I'd like to do is sort of reason through with you symbolically, looking at the Megillah through the other stories in Tanakh, why that is the case. So if we start with the first story, so Elimelech and Naomi choose to leave Beit Lechem and go to Moab. That story parallels what happened between Avram and Lot, right? So Lot and Avram don't separate because they don't have enough. They're too wealthy, right? We talked about about Elimelech and his family being wealthy and choosing to leave. They weren't leaving because they didn't have. They were leaving because they had and they didn't want to share. That was exactly the problem that Lot and Lot had with Avram, is that he didn't want to share. Going to Sodom represents this idea of self-centeredness, right? Sodom is all about shali, shali, v'shalach, shal. Yours, I'm not interested in what you have. I'm interested in me, what's for me. It's not that bad.
He disagrees.
There's actually a halacha category where if you can't provide anything for me and I'm only out for myself, that's called midas Sodom. And there are halachos that apply to preventing people from operating in that way. If that's the case, if we're going to continue to read it symbolically, then I think we can answer my hobby horse that I've been on for 4 or 5 months now. Why did Boaz? Yeah, November.
Really?
Yeah.
Not like yesterday.
It was yesterday.
Many yesterdays ago. Why does Boaz and Beit Lechem mistreat Rus and Naomi when they come? The answer is because they're giving them a taste of Sodom. They're giving them the experience of, oh, you're not interested in the Avram approach to things. Look how much Naomi adopted the Sodom/Moab approach. She comes back to Beit Lechem only when she hears that there's food, and she brings literally Moab with her, right? So she shows up, says, I hate God, he's terrible, he ruined everything, and by the way, I've got Moab right here with me. More mouths to feed. So Boaz and the people of Beit Lechem say, I understand you. You are the Moab approach, right? You are the Sodom approach. So here, you're not really here because you want to have a relationship with the Jewish people. You're here because the pickings are good, and the next time the pickings are not good, you'll move on somewhere else. You're not interested in investing and being a part of Beit Lechem, so we're going to give you a taste of your own medicine, right? These are your just desserts. You went to and embraced a worldview of Moab and Sodom, so you will now experience, when you come here, a worldview of Moab and Sodom.
The funny thing is that they do it the Jewish way.
Yeah, they still feed them, right? Even
it's not
they feed them the bare,
right?
No, look, halacha is halacha. I still have to give you something, but I'm not going to give you any more than the bare minimum, because you're not here as a Jew. You're here as an extension of Moab. You're here as an extension of Sodom. Okay. So if you're with me so far, we'll see if we can push this 1 or 2 steps further. What then happens when Naomi tells Rus to go down to the threshing floor? You have essentially Naomi recreating the story in the Midbar, right? You have what happened in the Midbar. Bilam tells Balak, here's how you're going to really get to the Jews. We couldn't curse them, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to have the Moabite girls cause all kinds of problems with the Jews. Right? So Naomi, here unfortunately in the role of Bilam, tells the Moabite girl, go down to the threshing floor and seduce Boaz, right? That's essentially what she tells her to do. Rus is the only person who flips the script, right? She gets the whole situation is recreated. She goes down to the threshing floor, everything is there for something inappropriate to take place, and Naomi tells her, Boaz will tell you what to do. Don't worry, this is all choreographed. Rus says, I have no interest in that. I'm not interested in just recreating. I'm here to change the situation. This is extremely delicious when you look at it through the lens of Teshuvah. Because the Rambam, and I should have brought a Rambam for you guys, the Rambam has a category in Hilchos Teshuvah called Teshuvah Gemura. So how do you know that you've done absolute complete Teshuvah? Is everyone familiar with this?
The same situation.
Not just same situation. What is the example that the Rambam uses? We'll use some made-up names. Let's say there's a man, we'll call him Yisrael. And this man, Yisrael, has sinned before with a woman. Let's name her Moaviyah, right? So Yisrael has sinned with Moaviyah before, but now Yisrael has done Teshuvah. So how, says the Rambam, can you know that you've done Teshuvah Gemura? The Rambam says, if the man and if Yisrael and Moaviyah are in the same hotel room together, and Yisrael still loves Moaviyah as much as he's ever loved her before, but he is parish, he removes himself and doesn't sin, that's how you know there's Teshuvah Gemura. So with all due respect to the Rambam, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You don't tell an alcoholic to go into a bar and sit down next to a delicious glass of Boondocks American whiskey and say, I'm here to conquer my Yetzer Hara, right? Just stay as far away as humanly possible from Moaviyah, right? What are you doing? But if the whole point is to conceptually use the Megillah to show that, no, we fixed the problem, whatever problem there was in the Midbar with the Jews and the Moabite women, Rus is here to repair that, then you have to literally recreate the scenario and then change the script. Is that, am I making sense, or am I just right because I'm talking really loud?
Well, Shiva Gemura wasn't like.
I'm excited. What can I say? This one got me excited.
I mean, it wasn't where you
Also,
have control.
didn't we-
It's not where you have control. It's like when, let's just say, life puts you in that same situation and you're able to conquer it. Now you have a shooting Gemura. I mean, it's
Correct.
almost like a once in a lifetime type thing. Meaning, technically, you would stay away from.
But what I'm
this
saying is,
situation.
shouldn't you? And let's put it another way. One of the questions we asked was, why doesn't Boaz leave? Right? Boaz, it says, and Chazal make it even more explicit. Yeah, from the threshing floor. Chazal make it more explicit that Boaz stayed there in full excitement with Rus there. Why doesn't he just leave? Because he can't, like you're saying, he's in the situation, and if he leaves, then he misses out on the fact that I'm fixing it. I'm doing something that is repairing not just me as a prat, as an individual, but the greater approach has symbolic and communal meaning, if that makes sense.
A little bit.
No.
Boaz come from Zimri.
Right?
Was from Cosby. Like, what?
Boaz is a Jew and Rus is a Moabite.
Yeah, but you don't have to worry about Shiva Gemura. Pinchas killed them.
This is true.
They're dead now.
There was just two people in public. There's a lot of problems.
Well, let me, and with this I promise we'll end and we'll get to step 4 and next week, please God. Let me just add a different take on the same concept. I don't know if we talked about this with Nick and Nora, but we'll start this way. A person has a child who loses their temper, right? And every time the kid loses their temper, Tati says, go into timeout for 5 minutes, right? We're not going to debate the merits or demerits of the parenting style, but whenever the kid loses his temper, 5-minute timeout. The kid comes over to the father and says, Tati, you didn't see it, but I lost my temper, and I put myself in timeout for 5 minutes, right? What has that kid done? What does he learn? He's mature enough to realize not only that he has a problem and he has to deal with the problem, but that how you deal with the problem, he's adopted as his way of dealing with the problem, right? That's very mature. The whole Masechtas Tainus is about what? There's no rain, so we have to fast. That's a terrible idea. There's no rain means there's no food. No food means why would you fast as a response to there not being any rain? It's the exact same concept. It's saying, God, Tati, I see there's a problem, and the way you're punishing me for this problem is you're taking away my food. So I'm going to own that problem by applying the punishment to myself to show you I get it. I understand what you're trying to do, and I'm going to do it because I understand that your approach to dealing with that problem is the best thing for me in order to course correct and to, yes, no, yes.
Well, that's like saying, like, while you're in the timeout, losing your temper and then going into like a deeper timeout.
What do you mean?
Because while they're fasting, the punishment is still happening. So
no, you're fasting in order to alleviate the punishment. If it works, the fast will precipitate rain. What you're supposed to expect.
It's not that the fast is going to precipitate rain.
No. Okay.
No, it's the tshuva that
correct.
Hopefully
correct.
Right. So again, it's
but
like,
what I'm saying is
like,
part of the tshuva is the fast.
No, but it's a step removed. Because if I was like, oh, I lost my temper, so I gave myself my own timeout. Idiot. The idea of the timeout is for you to not lose your temper.
Correct. And the idea of the fasting is to show me that whatever I'm doing until now is wrong and I need to change, right?
No, the fasting is not about not eating. The fasting is about tshuva.
Correct. But the reason that we choose fasting as part of the tshuva is because fasting is our way of doing the exact same thing that God is doing, right?
Not hitting ourselves.
It's about taking ownership of the problem, and I think that is what is going on with Boaz and Rus on the threshing floor. I think that's also why we have this drush of kicha mistei Ephraim, right? Is everyone familiar with this? Kedushin, this is like the most famous part of Kedushin, the very beginning. How do we know that a man can acquire a woman with kesef for marriage? Through a Gzera Shava. And the Gzera Shava is ki yikach ish isha, and then when Avram goes to buy the field, right, I gave you the kesef hasadeh kach mimeni. Why are we putting those two concepts together? The acquisition of a woman and the acquisition of karka. The same language is the Gzera Shava, but conceptually, what are the two of those things doing together?
The same language. That's why.
Besides the Gzera Shava, meaning I couldn't.
We're putting it together.
What do you mean?
That's the only reason we're putting
You wanted to get back to Zera?
I want to get back to Zera, and what I really want to get back to is owning your consequence, owning your punishment. Avram is coming to bury Sarah. He's coming to physically experience the breakdown that we had in Gan Eden. Afar Tavel, Afar Tashuv, right? And he is saying this is an example of that in real life, and I'm going to buy it. I'm going to own it. I'm going to own my problem, and that is the beginning of solving the problem. And next week we're going to get to Boaz, who does the same thing. He buys a field and a woman together. He does the same thing.
He buys the problem.
He buys the problem, and that's how he solves the problem. But we'll get to that more in depth next week. I know we've gone over. Thank you very much.